Let's turn to our other focus tonight, because this is a story that in a way is going to create more and more convulsions. In the last few days, the world has been stunned to see big tech companies like Meta and Twitter sacking employees in large numbers. Today, another addition to the list, Amazon, planning to lay off thousands of employees across the world. According to reports, the company could fire as many as 10,000 employees starting as soon as this week. And if the total number of layoffs stays around that, it would be the biggest ever in the history of the e-commerce giant. Amazon's layoffs come, as I said, even as other tech companies, including Twitter, Snap, Microsoft, already enforcing job cuts, and many others are announcing a slowdown in hiring. In India itself, Byju's also, among others, is resorting to layoffs. Let's go straight across to our guest tonight. Prabir Jha is of Prabir Jha Advisory. Is one of India's leading HR experts. N.S. Rajan, former group CHRO, Tata's, and former global leader of people and organization at EY. Appreciate your joining us. Mr. Rajan, let me come to you. Since you've looked at the tech sector carefully over the years, are you surprised at this sudden layoffs that are taking place in global companies, in India, startups that have been otherwise very successful like Byju's? Does it surprise you?
You know, Rajdeep, it's rather tragic. We know of crisis that hits companies and how people handle it. But today, I think the problem is somewhere else. You know, when you look at, on one hand, you see startups, on the other hand, you see technology companies and others. At one end, you are actually chasing valuation and then ending up eroding values. On the other end, you are chasing market cap and quarterly results, and you're losing human capital in the bargain. I think the writing was on the wall, because when you actually end up into indeterminate hiring, with a lot of desire to be able to seize the future in a hurry, you will end up actually doing indiscriminate firing at the end of it. So it is tragic for sure.
Prabir Jha, is it simply because these companies did not anticipate the nature of the slowdown? Is this an obvious consequence of the last few years, COVID, the Ukraine war, a global slowdown, UK today saying they're moving into recession? Or is there something specific to the tech industry in particular which tried to expand too soon in many cases?
So Rajdeep, both of them are true. I think when good times come, companies can get very bizarre in their manpower planning, staffing, and hiring. They do not visualize that the winter could set in some time, which it has, and there are recessionary pressures across. So response to a business reality is something I won't grudge the companies for, because they need to kind of risk mitigate their near-term quarters. But I think your other part of your question is actually the most scary one. I personally think it again reveals deep fault lines in the way companies are looking at human capital. I think they do not visualize enough what are the long-term consequences to their brand, to their talent attractiveness, to the culture, to issues of trust. And good times will come back. And this yo-yo of firing and hiring is something which is going to actually create problems for many, many of these marquee companies. And I think the leadership of these companies must reflect, must be prudent. And what is even more dangerous is that even closer home in India, many of the marquee companies which were startups and have gained traction in the last some quarters are actually behaving likewise to the big players. And that is something which in the Indian societal context, which does not have adequate social security support, is going to be a very dangerous sign for employees in general and for the reputation of these companies.
So, Mr. Rajan, are you saying, I mean, what would your advice be to these companies, both in India as well as abroad? Many of them have large presences in India. Do they need to sort of step back and look at the benefits of human capital as they move into future phases of expansion? Do they need to recognize what they are doing to thousands of lives at the moment? Need to step back and recognize the importance of human capital, not just quarter-to-quarter numbers?
So Rajdeep, in the near term, if I do not know what the details financially are for each of these companies, but one is an immediate near-term response and one is a more longitudinal response. In the near term, I guess they are trying to make sure that their expenses are reined in, and people costs in these companies are a significant part of their spend. So I think That's where they are tightening the belts. And I have always said this, letting go of people almost appears in every company as the immediate silver bullet response. It is unfortunate, but I've seen it in my entire career that people love to look at talent exits and therefore save costs. So one is a longitudinal business model response in terms of, do you need to have regular employees? Will the future of work allow for more categories of people, including gigs and the famous moonlighting debate can come back to this. So there is an opportunity of redoing the entire manpower staffing of these companies. But in the near term, I think I would expect to see a lot more of fairness and humaneness. So layoffs may be a brutal reality. It may have its business compulsions, but the way you do it will possibly speak a lot more about the true character and nature of these companies and the so-called big culture arguments that were talked about them. So to do it sensitively, to make sure that they support these exiting employees with potential re-employment, which I don't think is going to be very easy in the near term. The severance being a little more generous, and the ability to make sure they still retain trust and connect with those who are staying back. Because once the trust levels are broken, it could have a very dangerous dominoes effect as well.
Mr. Rajan, you want to respond, particularly in the Indian context? Do you see Indian IT companies being relatively insulated from what we are seeing globally?
No, I don't think so. In my mind, there are three aspects. There is a when, there is a who, and how you do it. Now the reality is that COVID has been one of the reasons where business actually boomed, and people were trying to seize the opportunity there. They were indiscriminately hiring left, right, and center, and reaching a point of proportion where there is no going back. Now, as much as the issue is a live issue, I think there are 2-3 dimensions that we need to be careful of and cognizant of. One is the fact that when is a layoff justified? In my mind, layoff is justified if there is a proven moral turpitude, or if there is a non-performance which is beyond redemption, or you're talking of people who have brazen sense of entitlement and to go against the norms of the company. But it's definitely not right or fair if a person is a performer who's contributing, compliant, and committed just because of business exigencies. And there is a larger impact it has on reputation at one end, and the kind of relationship you have with employees and culture. Reputation, for instance, it takes years to earn it, but it takes minutes to lose. You're talking of relationship, the whole dimension comes to, is it just a transactional relationship, or is it something where you're trying to build an enduring strength and foundation of the enterprise? And today, when we're talking of culture, you also have the issue that just because somebody has not been laid off and is still inside the company, doesn't make him feel any safer.
But Mr. Rajan, this is in the United States, you spoke about culture. Layoffs have been perhaps far more frequent. They are seen as part of what you sign up for. In India, that's not the case. And now a younger generation, even some 25, 27-year-olds suddenly find themselves being laid off. How difficult is it to make that adjustment, Mr. Rajan?
I would agree with you. Culturally, we have been very different. And let me take a special case, but especially when the onset of COVID, I know of organizations, Indian organizations, where the senior leadership took accountability. There are people who actually sacrificed their own compensations, their variable pay, and said, if that can save cost at one end, it will also help me reduce the prospect of layoffs, or if it's possible, even delay it.
Right.
So I think we have had a far more human approach in the way we've handled it. But then, when you're talking of leadership, there are 2-3 elements that you have to bear in mind. As much as you're answerable to stakeholders, the leader is responsible for the performance of the enterprise. And then typically there are 2 levers, right? You reduce costs and enhance incomes.
Right.
Now reducing cost and people are the lowest hanging fruit. So traditionally across the world, this has been a trend. But I think in India, there has been a tendency to actually ape. So in startup world, a lot of people, when we look at practices outside in the world, we tend to actually imitate what is not good and rarely practice what is good out there.
Let me leave you on that thought. I wish we had more time, and we will in the days ahead. This is not an issue that's going away in the weeks and months ahead, but 2 fine voices joining me and explaining what exactly these layoffs really mean. Mr. Rajan, Prabir Jha, appreciate your joining me here on the news today.